Fighting to keep the peace, elite UN troops opened fire on rebel forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's raising the stakes for the peacekeeping mission and raising concerns that its new offensive mandate could backfire. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Shihab Ratansi. UN peacekeepers are taking a more combative role as fighting escalates in the Democratic Republic of Congo. An elite intervention brigade, given a robust mandate to take on armed groups, has been drawn into the fight, changing the dynamic of the conflict in the DRC's troubled east and raising questions about the UN's aggressive new military mandate. Renewed fighting has broken out around Goma, the capital of North Kivu province, close to the border with Rwanda. Malcolm Webb has more for Inside Story from Goma.
There's been a lot of heavy fighting just outside Goma over the last week, and scores of civilians have been caught up in it. In this hospital, it's inundated with civilian casualties. Mwumbi here has got shrapnel in her leg. This kind of wound is very common because both sides have been firing rockets and artillery at each other. And this boy here is called Daniel. He's just 4 years old. When a rocket landed on his house, he lost his hearing. A lot of the people that we've spoken to say they don't even know which side the rockets are coming from.
I just ask God. I just need this war to stop. They have destroyed our homes. They have killed people. I'm grateful my family have only been injured and not killed.
There's also been a large but still unknown number of military casualties as well. Captain Asimo Mbende was shot in the face.
We fought all night. The next day in the morning, the fighting intensified, and that's when I was shot. The bullet came through here and went out the back.
This is one of the houses that was hit, and it's right in the middle of the city of Goma. 5 people were injured here, and it must have been a big rocket because the place has been completely devastated. This is the remains of the electrical wiring. The floor is absolutely covered in tiny wooden splinters. This is the remains of the wooden roof that was completely blown apart. This light fitting also badly damaged. People here are worried this kind of thing will happen a lot more in the coming weeks because tensions are still very high between the Congolese government, the M23 rebels and the government of neighbouring Rwanda. Malcolm Webb for Inside Story, Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
The latest fighting has been brewing since the end of last year. Rebel fighters briefly seized Goma in November, but withdrew in return for a promise of peace talks. Those talks in Uganda have made little headway. M23 rebels are now being accused of rocket and mortar attacks on Goma and shelling neighbouring Rwanda. The group blames the cross-border attacks on the Congolese army. And UN peacekeepers from Uruguay have been accused of shooting dead 2 people during protests over the latest fighting. To our panel in a moment, but first joining us on the line from the Congolese capital Kinshasa is Felix Bass. He's a spokesman for MONUSCO, the UN peacekeeping mission there. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you for joining us. First of all, did Uruguayan UN peacekeepers kill 2 people in Goma?
Actually, there was a demonstration against MONUSCO people because people were angry for being bombed from M23. Up to now, we cannot say precisely what is happening. The special representative for the Secretary General in DRC, Mr. Marc-Andre, has himself initiated with the Congolese authorities a request that a joint investigation be carried out in order to see exactly what happened. Up to now, we cannot interfere in that process.
Right.
If we are a little bit patient, in a couple of days or in a couple of weeks, we will know more about it and we can tell you what happened. But up to now, let the process be carried out and later on we'll see.
So is that a joint investigation between the DRC authorities and the UN, or is that an independent investigation?
Joint investigation, MONUSCO
Right.
and the Congolese National Police.
Can you see any problems with that?
This is what we have requested,
right,
in order to know clearly what happened.
All right, well,
what were the facts?
We'll leave that there for the moment.
One Congolese citizen who died affect the whole force and affect the whole mission.
We'll leave that there for the moment, but there was a sense that one of the reasons for that unrest was unhappiness with the UN mission. The message was either do something or leave. What's your response to that sentiment?
Yeah, but we understand the frustrations of the population. You have to be there to understand how these people are suffering because of the exactions or negative activities of the armed groups, including M23. And we can understand that. And that's why I said MONUSCO is engaged in securing the population alongside the FARDC. That's why we've been carrying our fire missions to neutralize the M23 in Kibati. We have used our artillery and mortars to destroy M23 position at Kibati West and Kibati Triple Tower alongside with M23. So actually, things are going. We are trying to get the population out of the threat of the armed groups, particularly M23.
But there's another problem.
And the frustrations.
There is a problem there. There's another sense, though, that it's precisely your attacks on rebel positions that have increased the shelling on Goma, on civilian positions. It's your escalation of the attacks on rebel positions which is leading them to shell Goma and kill civilians.
Come on, how can UN can escalate the violence with the rebels? The UN is there to protect the civilians. I respect another point of view, but it doesn't mean that that view is the best one.
Tell us.
The UN is engaged alongside the FARDC to protect the civilians. Let's make it clear, Papa.
Tell us more about the military operations there. How do you coordinate with the Congolese military? What is the chain of command?
No, we have a separate chain of command. MONUSCO has its own chain of command. The Congolese have its own chain of command. But we are coordinating all our activities, are fighting side by side. We are providing all logistical, all fire, artillery fire to the Congolese army. We are fighting with the Congolese army.
How does the escalation of violence, though, and the attacks and the UN's military operations convince either the Congolese government to pursue the peace process or the M23 or the rebels to be convinced that the UN is an honest broker in that peace process?
No, come on, let's make it clear. The UN force is deployed in Congo to support the Congolese army. This is clear. So, it's true, there is a peace process, okay? But would you stand aside and watch the armed groups, including M23, killing the population, the civilian population? We have a mandate, and we are doing all our best to implement that mandate, which is to neutralize all armed groups, including M23. And this is what we are doing with the Congolese army.
Lieutenant Colonel, thank you very much. Let's bring in our guests now. Kambale Mousavi is spokesman for Friends of the Congo, a group pressing for peaceful and lasting change in the DRC. He's currently attending a charity event for the DRC in Las Vegas. And joining us from Nairobi, Marc-Andre Lagrange, senior analyst for Central Africa at the International Crisis Group. Clearly, Marc-Andre Lagrange, it's a really complicated situation. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Bass is correct. We can't stand by and watch people being killed by rebels, but there are many contradictions about the UN force, its role in this conflict that do have to be answered, don't they?
Hello, thank you very much. First of all, I am very pleased to hear Colonel Bass saying that he's here in Congo to defend civilians, because 1 year ago it was the same, saying that he was not here to defend location but to defend civilians, where civilians were attacked by armed groups. So this showed that it's not just a change in the UN speech. The last involvement of MONUSCO and especially the International Brigade demonstrate that there is a will from the MONUSCO to show that they are capable to do something to protect the people of Congo. And that's what they failed during the last leadership. And now we've seen that new leadership coming with Mr. Kambale, and they try to enforce that mandate like people understand it, meaning that protecting the people, protecting the protection of civilians is not just watching civilians being killed and making a report. That said, yes, the situation in Goma is very, very complex because you have a combination of parties, M23 and FARDC, who wants to drag the United Nations into the fight, and you have even provocation by parties. The US State Department stated that they have credible reports that M23 fired into Rwanda to provoke Rwanda, to provoke a military reaction from Rwanda. The shelling in Goma, there are several reports from the Congolese authorities saying that they were fired from Rwanda. So we have a very complex situation where people want to drag the United Nations into a military solution and a military confrontation, which would expand, and there is a real risk of regional war if this military option prevails. And that's why it's very important to keep on the discussion at Kampala between the government and the rebels.
Right, but we've been getting some very strong reaction on Facebook to the offensive mandate of this particular UN reaction force. Henry Carmichael says, I think it's time to start giving the UN teeth. It's time to create a global fighting force with the resources and abilities to bring peace. Sadikur Rahman disagrees, though, saying armed force always hampers peace talks. Amaru Ogwang Ezekiel tells us the UN has no role to play in Africa. Leave it to the AU, that's the African Union. And Martha McLachlan simply states UN mercenaries. Kambale Mousavi, I mean, that is part of the point, though. There is, again, no one wants to see civilians being killed without any sort of defense. But there is that danger that the UN ends up escalating the conflict if they're not careful. And indeed, there are other parties within the process here, within the conflict, who wants to push the UN to escalate the process through false flag operations or attacking Rwanda or so forth.
Yes, but it depends on how you look at the situation. The violence has escalated for the past year, is how you look at it. Even before the shelling of Goma, civilians in areas controlled by M23 have been terrorized. The real tragedy here is that we have a population that's being indiscriminately bombed, and there is no accountability for the deaths. It's almost as Congolese lives have no value. There are things that can be done to actually do this. We can discuss about M23 and the complexity of the militia groups there. What is clear is that we know who supports the M23. We know that it's supported by Congo's neighbor Rwanda, and there are things being done that needs to be done that's not being done right now. Yeah, but a member of the Security Council, Rwanda is not being held accountable for the situation. By putting pressure on this country, we can have lasting peace in the region.
Right, but does the UN military action, though, detract from the diplomatic effort, the various diplomatic tracks, though, on trying to get the various parties to talk and to pressurize Rwanda to end any support it still continues to give to M23? Kambale.
Indeed, but you frame the discussion in the context of M23. Congo cannot discuss with the M23 because that's not who we are fighting. Congo is not fighting the M23. We have a proxy rebel force supported by Congo's neighbors. But discussing with the M23, we are just continuing what has been going on for 17 years. We have proxy militias supported by outside forces, but solutions is we are going to be putting Bertrand Bisimwa or Sultani Makenga at the table and not dealing with the continued support, because when they are removed, tomorrow we're going to have another rebel, a rebel leader, and we haven't dealt with the problem of that continuous support. That's really where the problem lies, right. That we can continue to have this discussion if we don't put pressure on Congo's neighbors to stop supporting destabilization, and we have Congo's neighbors at the table to discuss it. we're not going to come to a peaceful solution.
Well, exactly, but then that is then that question, though, as to whether then this UN intervention force is designed to focus all the efforts on M23 and not so much on the regional issues. And in fact, let's just give you some background on M23. It's the largest rebel group in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It takes its name from an agreement on March 23rd, 2009, which integrated it into the DRC's national army. But in April of last year, M23 members deserted, complaining of discrimination and poor treatment. The movement is estimated to number some 2,000 fighters, and in November it dealt a serious blow to the credibility of what is the world's largest peacekeeping force when it marched past UN soldiers to seize Goma. That seems unlikely to happen again. The new UN intervention brigade, set up last month, is authorized to carry out what are described as targeted offensive operations. In short, they can fire first. And earlier this month, UN peacekeepers gave M23 rebels 48 hours to lay down their arms, but that deadline was ignored. Marc-Andre Lagrange, we're back to, though, this question of whether there is a coherent UN strategy. They do seem to be concentrating on M23 now with this stabilization force, this intervention force rather, as opposed to concentrating on all the other factors, the other regional factors, on all the other separate tracks to bring peace to the DRC.
Well, the United Nations are concentrating on M23 because there is a need for them to demonstrate to the population of Goma that they will not fail them again. And in November 2012, the United Nations said that they would defend Goma against any forces against the M23, and they've proven to have not been capable to do that. So now they have to prove to Congolese population, especially in Goma, that they do care about them and they are capable to protect them from M23 and capable to protect them from any armed group, the M23 being the strongest one and the more well-known and the more famous.
Right.
There are other areas like in Pinga where there is a desperate need of a reaction from the United Nations toward the human rights abuse by the Mai Mai Cheka, but also in Masisi you need to prevent escalation between ethnic groups, between the Hunde, the Hutu, the Nyanga. In Walikale territory is the same. There is a very complex situation where the crisis of the M23 has raised again the ethnic and the land conflicts that are linked to the ethnic problematic in North Kivu. And United Nations are now concentrating on M23 because they are the biggest threat, because they are the one who twice since July initiated military operations to demonstrate their strengths to threat the international brigade. And this is the reason why, at the moment, the United Nations are taking care of the M23. Now, I believe that, as Colonel Bass said, the MONUSCO is fully aware of its mandate, and they have to protect all civilians against all armed groups. And the international brigade is mandated to fight not only the M23 but also the FDLR, also the ADF, also the FNL. ADF are Ugandan groups, FNL Burundian armed group.
What about the militias who are allied to the Congolese government who are terrorizing civilians? Or what about the military, the Congolese military itself, which is accused of terrible human rights abuses? What happens to the mandate then?
Well, Congolese military are conducting security sector reform, and the Congolese government is conducting a security sector reform which needs to include the question of justice and impunity among the 4DC. And not just the chain of command and the logistical chains for the battle. I think this is a beginning. The DRC government agreed that they had to conduct this reform in Addis Ababa in February 24th this year, which is a first step, a big step, because up to now the DRC government was quite reluctant to admit this. now we have to watch carefully what are the efforts the government will do, and if it will implement what is said. This is just the beginning.
Right.
So
okay.
We need to give time to time.
Kambale Mousavi, I suppose what I'm trying to get at, though, is there a coherent strategy? We've had so many different initiatives over the past few years. There is some relief, clearly, that the UN is finally at least attempting to protect civilians and go after those who may be targeting civilians. But how does this connect to all the other complex issues which Marc-Andre touched on there, the local issues, the regional issues? Are you convinced that they are seizing upon those issues, which by now there's no excuse for not actually understanding the complexity of some of these and perhaps trying to learn the mistakes of previous initiatives? Is that going on as well?
Well, just listen to the conversation, and I have to continue to insist on this. We are speaking about symptomatic problems that have a larger context to be looked at. The strategy that the UN and the international community has failed to implement is holding perpetrators of the violence accountable. Without justice, there cannot be peace. As long as we continue to do that, we will not solve the problem in the Congo. It's really simple. The conflict in the Congo is caused by two things: the two invasions of Congo's neighbors, Rwanda and Uganda, and the continued support of proxy rebel militias there. When we do not look at this, we are going to be speaking about the Mai-Mais, the local issues, the FNL and others. But if we don't put pressure, Tanzania president gave us a path to peace. So here's how we frame it. We believe for peace to be in the region, there needs to be the accountability, holding Rwanda and Uganda accountable. Second, there needs to be inter-Rwanda dialogue that will bring Rwandans together, the Hutus, Tutsis, the civil society of the country, and those who are still living in the Congo and some of the militia groups from Rwanda back there. In Uganda, the same thing needs to happen. There needs to be the opening up of the political space in Uganda. And in the terms of the Congo, that goes to the question you ask about how do we deal with the Congolese armed forces who are committing crimes against the civilians. We know that the Congolese government does not have the legitimacy of the people because of the fragile elections in 2011. Supporting democratic aspirations of the Congolese by not interfering in Congolese politics or supporting the oppressive regime that exists and going to the path of the 2016 elections where the Congolese can have a representative in the government will help in having a strong military that reflects the people. So 3 is very clear what needs to happen. But what has happened is there is no willingness to actually say Paul Kagame of Rwanda must stop supporting rebel groups in the Congo and something there. But if we do not do that, we will continue to speak about the M23. It's only a year old that we've been speaking about the M23. It didn't exist before that.
Well,
but it's the same exact people.
Kambale, perhaps you can remind us, though,
1996 to present.
Why are those members of the UN Security Council, the UK and the US in particular, they still supporting Rwanda so much? Why are they so concerned? Why are they so frightened, though, to confront many of those actors that you just mentioned, Uganda, Rwanda, even DRC? Why aren't they pushing for that accountability?
Yes, but the Rwanda and Uganda are U.S. allies on the war on terror. You have Ugandan soldiers in Iraq, in Afghanistan. You have Rwandan soldiers in Haiti, in Darfur. The U.S. has military and strategic interests in the region. So they are willing to not hold their allies accountable. But in the case of the Congo, it's very particular. We do not need necessarily to have their goodwill to actually stop the support. It's actually a United States law, Public Law 109456, which calls for the U.S. government to freeze aid to any nations destabilizing the Congo. And this law was written by Barack Obama, the current president of the United States. So because of military interests and strategic interests, speaking about strategic minerals in the region, we are allowing the death of over 6 million Congolese. We had the city of Goma bombed last week. Population massacred. Some numbers are going high to 80 people dead in the region. And yet, the political will is not there. But I know something. We do not necessarily need the government to deal with this. It's the people of this world, in this country, the American people, the British citizens, are they aware that their governments are supporting oppressive regime in Africa that has caused the death of millions? That's the call. Because we did the same thing with South Africa. When we supported the South Africans to end apartheid, we need to do the same thing for the Congo. But if we don't frame the conflict in a proper way. Today we will talk about M23, tomorrow we will talk about M25.
Right.
It could be any rebel militias, but if what we know is we have to put pressure to Congo's neighbors.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks to my guests Kambale Mousavi and Marc-Andre Lagrange, and also to MONUSCO spokesman Felix Bass, who joined us earlier on the line from the DRC. Don't forget you can find this program and many others at aljazeera.com. Just follow the links for shows and Inside Story. Thank you for watching. I'm Shihab Ratansi. Goodbye for now.